City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Harold Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is one of America's foremost directors and actors, Mr. Gene Saks. Gene, welcome. I want to talk to you mostly about directing, but before we do, you started out, I think, as an actor, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
I mean,
yes.
did you want to be an actor from very early on?
I think from my junior year in high school.
Really? Did you grow up in New York?
No, I grew up in Hackensack, New Jersey.
Did you?
Yes. And my dad worked in New York. He had a business in New York, and so I did a lot of commuting to New York, saw shows and so forth. But when basketball failed me, I thought, well, the thing I seem to excel in is talking in front of the assembly and doing little bits of acting that way. And so I think one does what one is comfortable with and seems to do better than anybody else,
right,
or most of the other people in his class. And you naturally go in that direction.
So then, now, did you go to acting school, or have some kind of training?
I went to Cornell.
Yes.
And I had got an A.B. in what was then called speech and drama.
Yes. But they've always had an active theater department.
They had a wonderful man named A.M. Drummond,
right,
who was a student of George Pierce Baker in that famous workshop, I guess, at Harvard, long before my time or your time.
Yes.
If there is such a time.
Period.
But he was a wonderful man, and my first acting teacher, he didn't do much teaching, but you learned. You got a pretty good picture of how you were doing through him. So I started there and became president of the dramatic club, and then the war came, and I was in service for 3.5, 4 years. And when I got out, I said, you better be an actor, because, you know, I found out life could be short in the war, and you better do what you want. And so with a herd of other people, I went to the dramatic workshop of the new school, run by Erwin Piscator.
Yes.
And who was a part of the Piscator Brecht Theater in Berlin before they threw him out. And I think everybody, it was kind of like the army, that school, because if you were warm, they took you in. Yes. And so we were thrown into this uneducated group of young people like Tony Curtis and Walter Matthau and Harry Belafonte and so many others were thrown into this pot and went up on stage and did such plays as Lysistrata and The Enemy of the People, and all a classic repertory which we knew nothing about, but gave us an idea of how big the world was and how big dramatic literature was. And it was a kind of wonderful thing, I think.
And then what was your first Broadway role?
My first Broadway role was in a play by Marcel Pagnol called Topaz.
Yes.
Which lasted one night. It opened and closed on a Saturday night. It had Oscar Karlweis and Tilly Losh and Clarence Derwent and a lot of those names of the past. And
what was your first Broadway success then that you were in?
My first Broadway success, well, I replaced in Mr. Roberts.
Oh, yes.
And went on the road in that, and then replaced in South Pacific and played that in New York for a couple of years. I guess my first success was in The 10th Man by Paddy Chayefsky.
Yes.
And then I did A Shot in the Dark.
Yes.
And then I did 1,000 Clowns. And out of that, I began directing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did the directing, it evolved then out of your being an actor?
The directing came, yes, from that. I was in the actor's studio.
Yes.
And one summer, I think it was 1959, I went to Spoleto, to the festival in Italy, appearing in a couple of short pieces in an evening of French, Italian, and American pieces, which was kind of like a review. And one of the Italian pieces was a sketch, a one-act play that was more like a sketch by Italo Calvino, the famous novelist, now dead. It was a very funny piece. And I thought, and I got back to the States, and we went back to the actor's studio, and Calvino showed up on a Ford grant at the actor's studio. And I spoke very little Italian, he spoke very little English, but I said, that sketch of yours was marvelous. I'd like to do it at the actor's studio. He said, he translated it. Together we translated it. And I wound up directing it. I wasn't in it. And it was, I think, the first comic piece ever done at the actor's studio.
Yes, because they did very serious things.
Very serious. But I tell you, it had them really laughing. And Morton Gottlieb, the producer, who was auditing the course at the actor's studio, and he came up to me and he said, I'm not a producer yet, and you're not a director yet, but I'm going to produce a play and you're going to direct it. I said, fine, good luck to both of us. He said, and he gave me Enter Laughing. And I said, yes, I think this is funny. I think I can help it be funny. So we got Alan Arkin, and we did it, and it was a
success.
A success. And so,
and later you did what, same time next year with
yes,
Morty Gottlieb.
That's right. That's right.
Which he produced in you.
Which
so
he
kept
also
his
produced.
word then.
So he did. And
but from then on, you've been directing steadily ever since then, both on the stage and films.
Yes.
Almost 50-50, isn't it, or close to that?
Well, it's more stage, I think, than film, but this last movie I did in Paris that we were just talking about, called Chin Chin, with Marcello Mastroianni and Julie Andrews, was a taste for me of what film could be if I really dove in and swam with all my strength and immersed myself in that medium. It's fascinating, and I'd like to do more of it.
Before we get to that, because I do want to talk about that, but I really want to talk about the stage and your directing, and particularly you've done 6 Neil Simon plays, I think.
Yes,
on Broadway.
I think by last count.
Yes, and you've done. You've won 3 Tonys, been nominated for 8, and you twice, I think, have had 3 plays running simultaneously on Broadway. That must be a real record, I would think. I don't think anybody has had that happen before.
I hope not.
But tell me a little bit about working with, for example, Neil Simon and directing his plays and directing comedy in general.
Well, Neil is a phenomenon, as we all know. I can't say enough about his proficiency, his
What about
ability.
The collaborative effort? At what point do you see the script that Neil Simon has written that you're going to direct?
Neil doesn't really ever show anybody a script until he knows he's going to get a positive answer.
Really? You mean he keeps refining it
on
his own?
I don't know. He does it very quickly. I mean, the usual scenario is this. I've written a new play. Calls me up and says, I have a new play. I say, wonderful. It's about this or that, he tells me, and he says, I've got the first act almost done. And he doesn't call unless he has the first act almost complete or complete. Because he says that if he goes 35 pages and he's still writing, he knows, he feels he's got to play. If he doesn't have the 35 pages, into a drawer or whatever he does with them, and he gives them up. And he calls you next week with another idea and another play. So it changes from day to day. But if he's written that first act, you know that that's going to... he has a new one, as a matter of fact, which we hope to do in the fall.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And
now tell me, you had done California Suite, for example.
Yes.
And then you started this trilogy.
Yes.
Brighton Beach Memoirs, Biloxi Blues, and Broadway Bound, which many people think are they're certainly different from some of the others and have a certain depth, and they're, of course, autobiographical. They're not the only ones. When you started, I guess when he started that, he didn't know it was going to be a trilogy, or did he?
I don't think so, no. He had told me about that play when we were doing California Suite. He said, I have an idea about a play about childhood. He said, you know, we shared a beach house with another family. And we had I'll never forget, he said, we each had shelves in the refrigerator. And my uncle's family and my father's family, and he said, everybody living in that small house. And I said, that sounds very interesting. That could be very funny, I think. And he said, yes, I've been thinking about it for some time. Years went by before he
really
wrote it. Yes. And of course, he changed it a lot. And he told me that after we were doing, he said, you know, until I got rid of the uncle,
who is not
in Brighton Beach, I couldn't find the play.
Tell me a little about directing comedy, and is it different from directing a serious drama, or is it a question of approach or degree of, or is it exactly that? How do you feel about it?
I'm told it's more difficult.
To be funny.
You know, I've never directed a serious play. I mean, to me, they're all serious.
I see.
You know,
as far as you're concerned, it's...
I approach it with deadly seriousness. I'm really an extremely serious person, and I take life, I think, too seriously. And I try to believe everything that I do with most seriousness.
And then do you want to transmit that to the actors too, to have them believe in their characters or that same fervor?
I suppose if it's so serious, it becomes funny. I suppose through intensity.
Do you realize that, or do you just?
Yes, I guess I do. Oh yes, in the back of my mind, I realize it's funny, and of course Neil's stuff is always so funny, so humorous that...
Let me ask you this: when you've been directing some of his plays, and you have audience reaction for the first time, a few previews, have you ever had a case where you've taken laughs out because of the line of the play or the meaning of the play?
Yes, I think we have sacrificed comedy sometimes for... and I think he's doing it more and more, and he's doing it more and more. He does it more than I do. I mean,
really?
he comes in and says, no, I'm trying to be funny here, and I shouldn't, and let's let that go because I think it's hurting
something further on.
Yes, and he's very conscious of that, and I am too, but it isn't easy to make people laugh, and so
it's not.
You give it up. You give it up reluctantly. Really.
Well, now, how do you proceed when in your rehearsal process and when you are working on a play and beginning with casting? I mean, is casting a problem for you, or do you already know the people you want to use a lot of times, or?
Casting, of course, I think is the most important thing of all. If there's any one thing that's most important, it's casting. And I spend a great deal of time casting. Neil and I both do. I feel I should be very patient and read people a couple of times. Sometimes you read someone and you want desperately to hire them and you think that's it. But you say, I'd better see it again, because The actor might have had an inspired day, or you may have been looking so hard for the character that when it was presented to you, you jumped at it when you should have been more cautious. So I like to take plenty of opportunity to make sure that we have the right person. And it's a tedious process. And I think one of the problems is you're inclined to say, oh, come on, let's finish it, let's get it over with. It's painful and it's tedious, and I want to get it cast. And you shouldn't give in to that. But casting is indeed a very difficult and lengthy.
Lots of times you and Neil both have not used big stars or big names. I mean, you've used really, I suppose, what one might call solid actors in a lot of these things.
Especially in a play that's a family, a cast of a family that must interrelate closely. I mean, if you have a star, you pitch it in a certain direction, it automatically attains an importance. The character attains an importance that might be bad for the play. I think if you can do, it depends on the play.
Yes.
I mean, if the play is has an obvious leading part that requires a great personality and a star personality, then it's sometimes suffers if you don't have a star.
Yes.
But with a kind of ensemble piece, for instance, of a family, I think it's terribly important not to have it unbalanced.
Did you read for the part of the son, who is the sort of narrator? Matthew Broderick played that part.
Yes, yes.
Did you read several people for that part?
A great many were read, but Matthew was, I think, a rather obvious choice. He was head and shoulders above everybody.
Now, in the rehearsal process, do you the first day, do you sit around and read the play?
Yes.
And then begin to...
But I don't like to read it more than twice at the most. I like to get up and get on our feet.
Start blocking the play? And
yes, I do. And I do far too much blocking at first. And,
you do?
And
then edit?
And then edit and get it simpler and simpler. I'm an actor, and I like to act. So I get everybody up there, and I start to go through the parts myself. And it feels good to walk around and do a lot of things which are very bad.
Oh, but you've got, obviously you've developed the discipline and the technique to pull back and to edit things out.
Well, you know, through experience, I find out a lot of movement and a lot of gesturing and a lot of excess is purely out of nervousness and by the actor, and out of lack of knowledge of the part.
Yes.
Well, you don't know quite what you're doing. You feel you must do something.
Now,
it's a hard lesson to learn to do nothing.
Yes, now, on stage, because you're so exposed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, do you learn a lot when you start run-throughs, and then do you learn a lot from the audience when they first come in?
A great deal. I think that's, you know, the director is primarily the viewer, the audience. And I think if he loses that sense, he's lost a great deal. That's why I think writers often should not direct their own plays, because they're too closely involved.
They don't have that perspective.
And it's difficult for them to sit back and just watch his audience. And I think directors can have that problem too, and must remember that their audience first of all. But it's an interesting phenomenon, I think, that first time that you have other people watching. I don't know what it is that happens, but a strange thing happens. You suddenly see it through their eyes, whereas you...
And not your own anymore.
And not your own anymore. You say, you know, you do look around to see if they're smiling or if they're sleeping, but you somehow you say, oh yes, of course, I see that moment. I see what that moment means to an audience. I didn't see it before. Yes. But suddenly a common denominator.
So you really learn from them.
Yes, I think a great deal.
Let's talk briefly about directing for film, because you did Barefoot in the Park with Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, The Odd Couple with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. Was it a difficult transition for you to move into film, or Of course, you did, to begin with, you did plays that had been adapted to film.
That's right. So, and doing Neil's plays, he adapts them himself. And the script is very good. You don't have to worry about changing it.
What about working with people like Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon? Was that...
That was a joy.
Was it from start to finish? Did you,
I know Walter for so many years, and
because you go back to that
dramatic workshop where we hung around in the green room of that school, and he's a joy because he's unpredictable, nasty, and very, very full of talent and philosophy and oft-times crap, but he's great. Jack, of course, is a wonderful, eager, enthusiastic, positive personality. And I loved Jane Fonda, and I liked Redford, too. Redford was very strange.
In what way?
He would suddenly disappear when we needed him, and say, has anyone seen Redford? And he was playing this city lawyer, which I suspect he never liked that character, because I think he always wanted to be a Westerner. He had a black cowboy hat, I remember, which he would wear with his blue serge suit. I think just to make sure that he kept
a certain identity.
His personality and his identity. And he would be walking around the periphery of the studio, just walking. You'd always have to call him, Bob, we're ready. He wouldn't say much. And of course, he was wonderfully proficient, and he's a talented man. But and I liked him very much, but he would take me out
on his own wavelength, really. Wasn't
yes, yes. He enjoyed taking me out in his sports car at 2 in the morning and racing around Hollywood and frightening me as he went around corners. He's a bit sadistic. Like to take this city boy.
But did he take direction well?
Yes, very.
Yes.
Very.
I guess all of these people took direction well, didn't they?
They did. Well, you know, I think it's because I'm a good comedian. And I read lines for people. And
when you're directing?
Yeah. I was always told, you never do that.
Yes.
Oh, heavens forbid. But Bob Preston would say, read it for me. And I would do the line. And he'd say, that's it.
With the inflections and everything.
Yeah, yeah. He said, why all this crap about not taking a read? If you read the line well, why shouldn't I take it from you? You know?
What did you direct Preston in?
Nobody Loves an Albatross,
oh, yes,
a play that he did that I was a kind of, it was a success,
right.
I would say. He had to leave that to go into a show called Ben Franklin,
right.
a musical that was a big bust.
Yes.
But he was wonderful.
Well, let's talk about musicals a little bit, because you directed Mame.
Yes.
And I Love My Wife and several musicals.
Half a Sixpence.
Half a Sixpence,
yeah.
yes.
Yes.
Tell me about musicals now as opposed to straight plays.
The musical is a mysterious form. You know what is said? It said that if you wanted a real punishment for Hitler, you should send him out of town in a musical that's in trouble. And it's really bad when...
Is this because of pulling all the elements together?
Yes. You start taking the one song that seems to work and say, let's put that at the end of the first act. And it doesn't, it works okay there, but then you say, well, what do we do with the rest of the first act? And you wind up using that as the opening number. And then you have no show. It's a treacherous, difficult kind of thing. The book is always some kind of fragmented, sketchy thing, and it has, of course, I think, become a choreographer's medium.
Yes.
That's why I was glad to see the new hit City of Angels,
yes.
that had a book that was very clever and had very little dance. I love dancing.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong, I love dancing, but I
now,
think
you did too. If Half a Sixpence, and of course it had a star, but that and I Love My Wife were sort of group pieces. But Mame had to have. We talked about a star before.
Star, yes.
That has to have one.
Absolutely.
And of course, Angela Lansbury was the first Mame. Was she? How was she to work with?
she was wonderful. You know, I don't think she really hit her stride until she was in the show for at least 3 months.
Really?
She didn't gain the ego that was necessary.
Yes,
for
because
her.
that character Mame has to be full of ego.
It was Rosalind Russell, you know, who and Angela, who was a very wonderful and modest person, didn't really have that Ethel Merman ego until she gained complete acceptance, and then she was fine. Then she walked down those stairs as if she owned it. But it's something that I think one has to acquire if they don't have it.
Is that presence and that take charge attitude.
Yes, really ego.
Yes.
Really, it is Muhammad Ali. I am the greatest.
I hate to say it, our time is up. It's gone by very quickly. Thank you very much for being here. My guest has been Gene Saks, and this has been Spotlight. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.